important, and it's brought up a lot. Feminism has no obligations, is something I've heard you say before. I don't think that's true. One of the obligations, or one of the things that's not an obligation under feminism, is to raise children, because no one has an obligation to do that. However, you will always have people who have children in a society because people want to have kids. That's just something that happens. So what we should do is we should incentivize people to have children by giving them the most economic resources available, the most personal freedom available, so that the people can make those decisions. We should not go straight to, let's force women to be in the home.
Nobody said force, okay?
Well, you were using the force doctrine.
No. Just because I appeal descriptively to force doctrine is something that you cannot avoid in any paradigm. It doesn't follow that I'm advocating to force women to have children. I'm asking from your perspective, if feminism is good for society,
yes,
and society requires both force and people, I'm asking, what's the obligatory position from your view that men and women have, and are they different?
They don't have distinct differences.
Okay, so if there's no obligations under feminism,
not true. There's not gender-specific obligations.
So there's no obligation for men under your feminist society to enforce rights.
There's there is not an obligation.
Is that gendered?
No. There is not an obligation for individuals to enforce anything. You don't have to become a police officer.
So how could you argue what's good for society? X is good for society. Society has preconditions. Do you agree? When we refer to society, we're talking about an aggregate of people living in an ordered community, right?
I don't think society necessarily has to be ordered, but I would say that
that's the definition.
Are. Well, I'll give us the definition you're providing, but I don't think the society has to be ordered. There can be a society in chaos.
Well, to say it's in chaos means it's bordered. You could actually look at it and say that society's in chaos and this one's not.
Sure, I guess.
So that's ordered.
No, you're defining ordered then as just distinct. Then fine, sure. Societies are distinct and separate from each other.
That's fine. So, but if you're saying, aren't you arguing tonight that feminism would assume, if you thought it was good, that it would be ordered?
Sure.
Okay. If feminism is good for society, and society, the way you're referring to it, is ordered, it requires force, which is gendered, and it requires duties that are tied to that force, which are gendered.
No.
Why? Yeah, because you're arguing for women's rights.
No, I disagree with the first part, that this idea of enforcement is inherently gendered.
Give me a counterexample.
Men don't have to enforce the law.
That's right. Is that the society you want to live in?
Men will enforce law, and women will enforce the law. People step up. No, because you're arguing that if we don't tell people, you have to enforce the law, you have to become a police officer, then no one will step up and do that. I think we can incentivize people and give them the most freedom possible, and individuals will gravitate towards the industries and societies.
Okay, let me ask you a different way. Is a society better? Let's say society A has built into its meta-ethical position that it has that men have the obligation to keep order with force, and then another society that doesn't have that obligation. Which society do you think is better?
Well, you're assuming in the first one that meta-ethical obligation would therefore entail that those people would follow that, right?
Well, yeah. Well, the obligation would include potential legality, but more so maybe social pressure of obligation. If that exists, let's say it was a society that appealed to women's rights, and there was an obligation for men to defend women and protect their rights, versus your feminist, hypothetical society that doesn't have any obligations. Not ultimately. True. Well, what's one obligation?
I think people should defend those who are more vulnerable than they are.
Women.
General. No. But women aren't just those who are more vulnerable, because of course we can see that there are women who are stronger than men. Mm-hmm. We can see that there are young men who are stronger than older men.
Particulars.
We can see, of course we should talk about particulars.
Well,
you are talking about, you're kind of making men and women out to be this homogenous group, that they're all kind of exist in separate domains, and that's just not how it works.
It is how it works, and I'm demonstrating that generality is a perfectly fine thing to do. I mean, you can take a bunch of particulars, add them up, and come up with a generalization. That's just basic induction. So inductively, isn't it the case that it seems to be the best way to do it, that it just happens to be the case that men are in the positions to enforce and defend and go to war? Why is it that men and women have different prison systems?
Why do men and women have different prison systems? I'm fully in favor of that.
I know, but couldn't you say, Your Honor, there are women who are, some women who are stronger than men, and there are some men, and vice versa and stuff, and appeal to these particulars. But isn't it the case that a prison system is a perfect example of the generality that I'm actually arguing from?
Sure, but now you're making ought claims. On what basis are you making ought claims? That
I didn't make an ought claim.
Well, you're saying men and women ought to be in different
I said descriptively the case, there's a reason why they are.
But that reason is based in an ought claim. Of course it is.
Do we have a duty to keep women away from outside of men's prisons?
Do we have a duty?
Yeah.
I mean, I think a society should.
From your point of view,
I think what you're doing is you're specifying duties really specifically. The duty is not to keep women out of men's prisons. The duty is to keep vulnerable people who are more vulnerable.
Women.
Not always necessarily. I don't think we should.
Who commits more aggressive acts against?
Of course, it's men. I'm not arguing that it's not men, but I think that in principle we should keep a very a man that is weaker away from a woman who is a serial killer.
Well, that's a particular. I'm talking about prisons, though. So why is it in your ideal feminist society? Why is it that if you're fighting for equality, why is it you still have separate prisons?
What do you mean? Well, here's the thing that I put in my feminism thing. We're not denying that there are disparities or differences. We don't deny that there's disparities or differences between groups of men. Mm. That doesn't mean that we think that
I still ask you why, though.
What?
The question was, why in your society are you obligated, from your perspective you're arguing tonight, to keep prisons separate?
Wait, who is obligated? Society as a whole?
Is your ideal society? Look, it's Oliver's world right now. Oliver is saying feminism is good for society. That means there's a type of society that appeals to feminism and practices it. I'm asking you from an outsider. Pretend I'm like I'm visiting, and I'm like, why do you guys separate your prisons? What's your answer?
I think we should largely separate prisons because, there are differences between men and women. And I think that men, if men are, especially men who are violent, especially men who are in prison, who have shown a lack of care for the safety of those around them, I think we should also ensure that men aren't hurting other men in prison either. I don't know.
So now I'm going to ask you, if you argue that women are generally, collectively more vulnerable than men, and that's why it's a good reason, I'm not arguing that there aren't some weak men that could be protected from stronger men, but we're talking about male-female here.
Why, though?
Why are we talking about
Why don't we go... Because you are creating two categories, and I'm saying that...
Do they exist?
Of course the categories exist, but you are making the claim that because Y is weaker than X, right? As a general rule. As a general rule, Y is weaker than X. Therefore, we have an obligation. We should, have separate prisons or something like that. Why can't we do that intragender, if that makes sense?
Well, if you agree that there's a good reason to have women and men's prisons separated, then I'm going to ask you, where's the threshold where you no longer follow that rule outside of the prison?
What do you...
I'm asking, where else in society are you willing to separate the women for the same reason?
Willing to separate women for the same reason?
Yeah.
I don't know.
For instance, let me give you a particular example. Is it better in your ideal feminist society that a weak woman is at home with her children and her husband at 11:30 p.m., or signing out of her penthouse office with her lanyard coming down the elevator at 11:30 p.m., potentially the victim of a male crime?
I think you are reducing what is best for women like a homogenous level or a group that's going to be best
just one
for
example.
Each of them. No, I don't.
What's better?
Well, you're saying what's better because you're assuming that this woman is going to be assaulted or something like that.
No,
I would rather not have a woman get assaulted, of course.
Hold on. What's more likely, though?
No, but the solution to that problem is not to say, okay, we need to keep all women in the home because men can't stop raping them. That's not really how we should operate society.
Well, actually, the fact that it's mostly men raping women goes to my point that the specific argument tonight, it comes back to the force doctrine every single time. It's never the case where you're going to be collectively writing rules and basically making society around this view that we should protect men from women ever, right?
We should protect men from everyone.
But no, I'm saying generally speaking, we don't structure society in a way that gears toward the concern of women aggressing men. It's usually the other way around, right?
I mean, I think we should do both. Like, I don't know. Like, I feel like a consequence of the patriarchy and these norms that we have is that men can't be victims of abuse. Men can't be physically abused by women, and I think that's a problem. We should not have that. If a man is persistent is subject to persistent physical abuse, that should be taken seriously by a woman.
Do you think that with enough manpower we can take down the patriarchy?
With enough manpower? I think with enough societal organization, with enough, like, I don't know. Yeah, work, we can do it, of course. We can restructure society. Of course we can restructure society.
So with enough manpower, we can restructure away from the patriarchy?
With enough change, we can get away from the patriarchy. I don't know, like, you're arguing that, like, because men have to do it, therefore it's invalid or something.
Well, that's kind of what I'm asking is, like, if I ask someone with enough manpower and resources, could you take down the thing that's literally going to be mirroring what you're aggregating in resources? In other words, to take down the patriarchy, you need to find a bunch of strong people to fight against this bunch of strong people. And the bunch of strong people you're going to find are going to look exactly like the collection of people you're going to be fighting against. So
sure,
it's never the case where you go, let's revolt against this tyrannical body of men who are impeding on our rights. You never go out and knock on the doors and grab the women first.
I mean, in order to fight? Or?
Yeah.
Sure. What you also wouldn't grab weak men. Like,
well, no, you would.
You would.
Why not?
No. Why? Because
they're still stronger than the women.
Not all women. No. No. You're saying I think there are. I think the echelon of, like, weakest men out there would absolutely be less strong than the average woman.
I'm not sure if you take the same body frame, if you knock on a door,
well, no, okay,
and it's like the same height, right, and even weight, if you're gonna go to war, you're gonna grab the dude. It's not just because of force, though. Would you agree that men are more likely to exert aggression, even for bad reasons, than women?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so if you're going to war, you would want someone who is able, capable, and willing to exert their aggression on another aggressor. Whereas if it's generally the case, women are a little more timid.
Why are they, though? Why are they more likely to exercise their aggression?
I think it's biology.
I don't know. I don't necessarily think that's the case.
Do you have a son?
Do I have a son? No, I don't.
I do.
Okay.
So are you saying that?
Well, you're raising your son, though.
Well, no, I'm saying that.
Of course, your son's going to reflect your worldview.
Well, no. A 3-year-old, and even beforehand, you're going to notice when you become a father, God willing, which is anti-feminist. You're going to see that there's a clear distinction between boys and girls in their very instinct and the way they even behave and express themselves. And the aggressive ones, the males, are aggressive. You just see it right in front of you.
That is not necessarily the case for all boys whatsoever.
I didn't say all. I said generally speaking.
Wait, but you're also raising your son specifically. Everything you do is in a gendered sense. You're raising your son to be what your version of a man is.
You don't think we should affirm gendered society?
I don't necessarily think we should tell people that there's a correct way to be a man or a correct way to be a woman. So no, I don't think that we should raise our sons to be aggressive, to show their, like I don't know, like that aggression is a good way to get what you want or something like that.
Well, I'm not saying that, but ultimately aggression and violence is an excellent way to get what you want. It works better. It's more critically.
Sure.
It's a critical path.
Would you rather your son, primarily when he has a disagreement with someone, like at school or something like that, get into a fist fight with the kid? Or would you rather have him have the communication skills to be able to talk that disagreement out?
Well, in that instance, the ideal is to keep him in a system, right, than to fight. We're not talking about whether or not violence is useful every time. Now,
is it more often useful or not?
Change it. No,
is it more often useful or
we're talking about maintain. The reason this came up is we're talking about maintaining society. For instance, let's take another thing. Would I rather the security guard at my school use force to stop an aggressor or talk to them nicely like the teacher does.
So wait, it would depend on the situation because
That's
I
right.
do, no, but I do absolutely think that in a lot of these situations, de-escalation can be effective and be more effective than just
Violence is great de-escalation.
no, it's not.
Yes, it is.
You're
Are you
one,
serious?
No, wait a second. You're one, assuming that the violence will be successful in its aim, and two, that it won't have other ramifications. I think a society that always deals with its problems violently will actually have worse consequences. I don't think we should encourage kids to beat the shit out of each other.
Nobody's saying that.
Every time, but that's what you're saying.
No, I'm not.
What, violence is a very effective way to get what you want.
I didn't say they ought. I described that it is. You keep
Okay.
confusing ought and descriptions.
No, but first off, I actually don't think it is because it can become self-defeating. If your way of always resolving conflict is resorting to violence,
Okay.
people will be less likely to associate with
but-
you. People will be less likely to
Really?
be around you. Yeah.
Really? Okay. So, but if you extrapolate that out, because we're talking about societies right now, is society better with feminism? Is feminism good for society, right?
Yes.
The reason this is such an important topic, this violence and force aspect, is because society itself, no matter how you try to poetically describe your vision of feminism, it's always going to be reliant on the threat of force. And so at this mass scale level, Oliver, you're going to be an advocate for a pointing gun, right, at the society and saying, if you aggress over here, force is going to come in. That's what the violation of a right is, right?
I don't think that's how I would want society to be
You don't
structured
want, if you
effectively.
want society with rights, which is in your opening, feminism, individuals having the same equal rights, equal
Yeah.
opportunities. If you want that, you have to enforce it.
Of course you do.
If you want that and you have to enforce it, you need to appeal to inequality. It's a contradiction.
What do you mean you have to appeal to inequality? Everyone has to appeal to inequality all the time in
No,
order to get what they want.
specifically with sexes.
No, wait a second. No, because then every man has to appeal to someone who is stronger than him.
Who's a man.
Unless, okay, then all men are at the mercy of the man who is stronger
That's right,
than them.
patriarchy. That's descriptively the case. Now that you admit that that's actually true, and I conceded that that's true,
Why does that matter?
I'm saying it matters because if you advocate for a feminist society, you're actually, I would argue that rights themselves, feminism is actually sexist, ironically, because feminism, assuming rights, assumes there's a body of men who are going to defend those rights. They don't have the obligation to do that.
Of course people have an obligation to defend those who
Under
are-
feminism, why?
Why?
Yeah.
I just think in general, everyone should have an obligation to defend
cares?
those.
Who cares what you think?
Sure. If you don't have any sort of empathy or care for anyone else other than yourself.
Empathy isn't it, dude. I've seen a video you did. Empathy is an involuntary signal that is perhaps what someone else is experiencing. That doesn't tell you what you ought to do. You're in a debate now arguing feminism is good for society. I bring in what's necessary to keep the good in society and highlight force. I ask you point blank under your feminist view, do men have the obligation morally, ethically, to uphold law that provides the playground you call feminism, feminist
not because
freedom?
they're men. Society in general has an obligation, I guess, to maintain itself.
Okay.
But it doesn't follow from that every man has an obligation to uphold society.
I didn't say
because he's
every
a
man.
Well, then this doesn't have any bearing.
It does
on
bear. It does have bearing because we're talking about a collective, right? We're choosing the people who already exist right now.
Let's choose the stronger men. Let's choose.
There's
the
a
men-
bunch of
let's-
strong men
let's
right
choose
now.
the men that can actually enforce
There's
their
a
will.
bunch of men right now who are really strong.
Yes,
They're
just
in
that.
uniforms.
Yes.
Yep. They have to be trained. They're in uniforms.
Sure.
Cops, probably too unhealthy for my taste. But let's just say they're all fit.
Okay.
They're in a position where they come in and there's a man or a woman being aggravated, assaulted by someone.
Okay.
Under your system of feminism, because it has to be from a feminist view, why does the collective of mostly men who are the enforcement arm, why do they have an obligation to defend anybody?
Because you shouldn't want to see people hurt. Like I don't know how to. I don't know how to appeal.
That's like saying
No, wait, I
you
don't
should
know.
like licorice ice cream.
No, I don't, because I think seeing someone suffering and wanting that not to exist is different than ice cream flavor.
No.
What do you like?
No.
No. I think you're appealing to an ultimately morally relativistic
No, you're
idea.
acting.
No, you are. You're appealing to this idea of moral relativism.
No, it's your view.
No, it's not my view.
Of course it is.
I am not a moral relativist.
You have to be.
No, I don't have to be. Absolutely not.
Okay, how do you
would you like me to tell you how I
Why is feminism morally good?
Why is it morally good? So we can appeal to, for example, I think that moral objectivism can be defended on the basis the same way that what is it called? Epistemic objectivism can be defended. Basically this idea that I know that the world around me exists. How do I know that the world around me exists? Do I really know that the world around me exists?
No, I wouldn't grant that, but go on.
Okay, well, so we don't really. We're trusting our senses to tell us that the world around us exists. I'm intuitively trusting that you are sitting in front of me with a microphone, I have a microphone, I have my iPad, a glass of water here, all of that. I could be wrong. I could indeed be wrong. I could be a brain in a vat. But I'm trusting my intuitive sense that my senses are telling me correct information.
I'm going to grant you an escape from solipsism. I'm going to grant you your sense data. How do you get a moral statement from sense data?
Because moral statements largely are sense-based. I can't give you you can't really give me moral objectivism either.
Wait.
View.
My view's not on the chopping block.
Well,
You're
why
the
can't it
affirmative.
be?
You're the affirmative. We can get into it, but the affirmative is feminism is good for society. That's what you came today, right?
It leads to people having better lives.
Let's say my view, Christianity, what if it was just terrible for society? It still wouldn't change the position you're in. You would have to argue why feminism is good for society.
Sure.
So if you're going to sense data and you're saying, well, I use sense data to navigate the world, and I evaluate the sense data.
It also tells me murder. It also tells me unjustified killing is wrong.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, why not?
Look.
Why doesn't it?
Does your eye tell you that this is black?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Yeah.
So black has a frequency, a reflective aspect of light?
Sure, I could be wrong.
Yeah,
though.
right. But the frequency exists, right?
The same frequency of having an intuition on a moral level.
No. Hold on.
The relevant
Hold on
difference?
a second. The reason I asked about the microphone is that black, red, the spectrum of colors, the frequency of light that all comes from white, it reflects differently. And so that maintains, even if you and I see things slightly different, the thing that
What if I say it's not black?
that maintains, well, I would say
What if I say it's not black?
a dark gray.
Okay, then what if I say that it's white?
You could understand, well, if you said it was white, said it was white, then we would appeal to some other people's views.
So we can appeal to other people's views. So if
That's sense data.
if one person says that murder is okay and everyone else disagrees and says that it's wrong, we can appeal to them and say you're wrong.
Wait a second.
In the same way that I would say that that's white.
Are you arguing? So wait, how is that not subjectivism from your position?
I think that it is as objective as we can get.
Oh, so you're saying it's not objective?
Well, because I don't think we can have 100% certainty.
This is what I'm asking you.
I don't think we can have 100% certainty on anything.
Where in the instance of a person deleting another person, where in the sense data itself,
Sure.
the person is a size, they have hair, they have a shirt on or not, these are all features of reality that you're pointing to the external world. Where in that are you perceiving morality?
Where am I perceiving morality? The sense that I get, the intuitive sense that I get out
But
of
it's not the sense data, though.
It can be, absolutely. I would see it. Wait a second. No, hold on. I would see
Is this moral?
What?
Is this moral?
Having water?
This cup. Can you determine this cup, is it moral or not?
If you were to throw it at me, I could.
No, it wouldn't be the cup that was immoral.
Sure, it wouldn't. But what would matter about that?
So what I'm pointing to is you said, because now we're in metaethics, because if you're saying feminism is good for society, if you're saying it's good for society, you're making a metaethical statement about the good. I'm asking from your view what grounds the good, and you said sense data. But the thing is, you can't point to anything in the world that occurs as an event and look at the event itself and retrieve empirically the good.
Why not?
Well, you're claiming it. How? Where is it?
I see something happen and I have an intuitive sense about it.
Okay, someone sees something else and they have an intuitive sense that it was justified, and you disagree.
Okay, absolutely. And
whose wins?
No, wait a second. But that's the same problem empirically.
No,
I say that's
it's
white.
not.
If I say that's white and you say
That's
it's not,
not.
How are they different?
That's not the same.
But how are they different?
Because
Explain to me.
this is actual sense data.
No.
This is actual sense data.
Sure.
The opinion about what this is not whether or not it's good or not. This is ought. This is
Wait a second.
This is Hume's guillotine. This is like describing things into the good, right? This is a philosophical problem that you can't bridge.
No, Izot. I get the Izot for it.
Right,
I know
but
that.
why would, if you know that, why
I'm
would
aware
you?
of that because at some point you have to assert a moral claim that you can't further back up. They have to bottom out somewhere.
So
they have to bottom
then
out
Oliver,
somewhere.
why would you even use sense data? Why don't you just say, regardless of seeing anything, I have a feeling? What if someone described something, you didn't see anything, and you got a
but
feeling?
wait a second, but that's still sense data. You hear it from them, you hear their story, you hear that, it evokes a response in you. So yeah, and then that's the response.
Okay, so
The same way I see that.
okay, then how do you argue with, let's say, a nation predominantly held like a Christian view that feminism was immoral, and they outnumbered you? Would you just submit?
No, you can't. Well, you can't. You just make fine. Then yeah, whoever has the most power automatically wins.
You mean force?